someone else, but not for me. Our love was out to get me. Now that's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. I thought love was more or less a given thing. Seems the more I gave, the less I got. What's the use in trying? All you get is pain. When I needed sunshine, I got rain. Oh, then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. saw her face. Now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love, I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. Yes, I saw her face. Now I'm a believer, I'm not a trace of doubt in my mind. Said I'm a believer, yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm a believer, yeah, I'm a believer.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Got to know how to float it, like on him rolling. Mashed potato, do the alligator. Put your hand on your hip step, let your backbone slip. Do the 1, 2, say, like my little Lucy. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Need somebody to help me say it one time. Na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na. You know I feel all right. Huh. Feel pretty good, y'all. Huh. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Come on, y'all, let's say it one more time. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Long tall Sally, twisting with Lucy. Doing the 1, 2, say, roll over on your back. I like it like that. Do that jerk. Watch me work, y'all. I'll do it. I'll do it. Help me do it. Help me.
The night we met, I knew I needed you so. And if I had the chance, I'd never let you go. So won't you say you love me? I'll make you so proud of me. We'll make them turn their heads every place we go. So won't you please be my new baby? Say you'll be my darling. Be my baby now.
We all know the story. It started in 1964 with a Ford Mustang. No, wait, I mean the Plymouth Barracuda. Or the Pontiac GTO. Or was it earlier with the Pontiac Catalina SD? The 50s Dodge D500 maybe? Debating the origin of the muscle car is like debating over the first rock and roll record. Everyone you talk to has a different opinion, and no one is exactly wrong. Let's just say that by the early 60s, a generation coming of age fell in love with high-performance midsize cars coming out of Detroit, and for a few brief years, performance ruled the day. Here are top 10 60s era muscle cars that deserve to re-enter the conversation. (1964) Studebaker Avanti R3. The Avanti isn't generally counted among muscle cars, but then, Studebaker was never exactly considered a performance powerhouse to begin with. But the fiberglass Avanti had a long hood, short rear deck, and 289 cubic inch V8 a full 2 years before the Ford Mustang did. In 1964, after production officially ended, Studebaker bored out 9 V8s to 304 cubic inches, slapped a Paxton supercharger on them, and dropped them into remaining Avantis. The result was a 171 mph rocket, which the company claimed made it the fastest production car in America. This R3 was sold by Auctions America in 2010 for $96,250. With the collector market being what it is today, good luck finding one this cheap ever again. (1965) Pontiac 2+2. As far as classic muscle cars go, the 65-67 GTO is remembered to be about as big as they came. But with the success of the GTO, Pontiac wanted to take its go-fast formula to an even bigger car, which became the 65-67 2+2. Based on the full-size Catalina two-door, the 2+2 had its own unique 338 horsepower 421 cubic inch V8, and in high-output guise, power jumped to 376 ponies, which when tuned right could rocket from 0 to 60 in a mind-bending 3.9 seconds. Bigger, plusher, and often faster than its smaller stablemate, the 2+2 deserves a lot more love from speed freaks. (1964) Mercury Comet Cyclone. For 60s Ford products, the Mercury Comet was about as basic as they came. Closely based on the Ford Falcon, the 64-65 Comet could be livened up with Ford's famous 289 cubic inch V8. But for those who wanted more from their Mercurys, Ford built 50 Comet Cyclones for the drag strip, complete with fiberglass hood, fenders, doors and front bumper, plexiglass windows, and the same 425 horsepower 427 V8 found in the Shelby Cobra. In '66, Mercury introduced the production Comet GT with a 390 V8, and while they're capable compact muscle cars, they couldn't hope to match the insanity of their big block predecessor. (1968) Ford Ranchero 500. It's been long overshadowed by Chevy's iconic El Camino, but the Ford Ranchero was America's first car-based ute. And while Chevy was offering the 396 V8 in its muscle trucks, Ford upped the ante in '68 and made its restyled Ranchero available with a 335 horsepower Cobra Jet 428 V8. Unfortunately, a lack of weight over the rear wheels made the hot Rancheros a handful to drive, so very few were built with Ford's biggest motor. While it seems like every surviving El Camino happens to be an SS model, we can't remember the last time we've seen a Cobra Jet Ranchero. Come to think of it, we can't remember the last time we've seen any Ranchero. (1969) Chevy Kingswood 427. Back in the '60s, you could order virtually any option you wanted on a car, and companies would actually build it for you. So imagine you've got a growing family, and your Corvette just can't handle them. What to do? Buy a Chevy Kingswood station wagon with rally wheels, hideaway headlights, seating for 7, and the same 390 horsepower V8 found in your Vette. Only 546 buyers opted for the big V8 in '69, but a number of 427 Kingswoods spent the next decade making their mark on the drag strip. 1969 Oldsmobile Rally 350. When gearheads think of outrageous muscle cars from 1969, the Pontiac GTO Judge easily sits at the top of the list. But while the Judge has gone on to become a legend, Oldsmobile's analog, the Rally 350, is all but forgotten. Like the Judge, at least at first, it was offered in one outrageous color, Sebring yellow, had color-matched wheels and bumpers, a spoiler, and a fiberglass hood. And compared to Olds' top dog 442, the car's 310 horsepower 350 cubic inch V8 made it significantly lighter, allowing it to scramble from 0 to 60 in 7 seconds and run the quarter mile in a respectable 15.27 seconds at 97 miles per hour. Just 3,500 Rally 350s were built, making it one of the more obscure muscle cars to ever come from GM. 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. Half a century on, the Plymouth Roadrunner Superbird and Dodge Daytona get all the love when it comes to NASCAR homologation specials. But in 1969, Ford tried its hand at aerodynamics too and built the Torino Talladega. Starting with a Torino Sports roof, Ford worked with the Holman Moody Race Shop to design a sleeker, longer front clip and rear fascia for the car. The Talladega was honed in the wind tunnel, a relative novelty for the era, and powered by the 429 cubic inch V8 found in the Boss Mustang. Production was over by March. Ford only built 754 of them and they were barely advertised, but the slippery cars dominated during the '69 season, winning 29 races. In 1970, however, the 200-mile-per-hour Superbird ruled NASCAR, and the Talladega's time in the spotlight was over. Today, the Talladega, and near-identical Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2, are bargains on the collector market compared to the big-nosed Mopars. '69 Pontiac Grand Prix SJ. The second-generation Grand Prix is largely remembered for its role in popularizing the personal luxury coupe segment, but in its early days, it was one of the hottest cars on the street. With a long hood, the longest hood of any production car in '69 in fact, and short deck, the Grand Prix was available with Pontiac's 390 horsepower 428 cubic inch V8, allowing it to scramble from 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds and run the quarter mile in 15 seconds at 97 miles per hour. Its combination of luxury and power made it the Grand Prix massive hit for Pontiac. Within a few years, any semblance of performance would be gone. 1970 Chrysler Hearst 300. As early as 1970, Chrysler diehards were feeling nostalgic for the 300-letter series, which ended in 1965. The 300 series carried on, but performance had taken a back seat as mid-sized muscle cars had picked up the go-fast mantle. Chrysler tried to recapture the magic for '70 by outfitting a 300 coupe with the interior from an Imperial, a fiberglass hood and deck lid, a 375 horsepower 440 cubic inch V8, and a torque float automatic to handle all that power. At 18.5 feet long and 4,400 pounds, the big Chrysler could still make 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds and run the quarter mile in 15.3 seconds. With just 500 built, the Hearst 300's ranked as one of the rarest Mopar muscle cars of all time. '71 AMC SC 360 Hornet. In the '60s, AMC's red, white, and blue Rebel Machine and SC Rambler muscle cars failed to move the sales needle for America's last independent automaker, but they sure caused a scene wherever they went. For 1970, the company had introduced the compact Hornet and Gremlin to replace the Rambler. and with them came the SC360 Hornet. With an available 285 horsepower 360 cubic inch V8 under the hood, the small Hornet could hit 60 from a standstill in 6.7 seconds, and run the quarter mile in 14.9 seconds at 97 miles per hour. But in 1970, displacement still ruled the day, and despite being cheaper than a Plymouth Duster 340, AMC found just 784 buyers for its smallest muscle car. We think it's aged remarkably well, and would love to take one of these 70s air sleepers to the drag strip.
It's your thing. Do what you wanna do. I can't tell you who to sock it to. It's your thing. Do what you wanna do. I can't tell you who to sock it to. If you want me to love you, maybe I'll wait. Believe me, woman, it ain't no big deal. Oh, you need love now, just as bad as I do. Makes me no difference now who you give your thing to. Oh, it's your thing. Do what you wanna do. I can't tell you who to talk to. It's your thing. Do what you wanna do now. I can't tell you who to sock it to. All right. Lord have mercy. It's your thing. Do what you wanna do. Ooh, I can't tell you who to sock it to. Hit the bed. It's your thing. Yeah, do what you wanna do. Ooh, I can't tell you who to sock it to. I'm not trying to run your life. I know you wanna do what's right. I'll give your love, girl, to whoever you choose. How can you lose with the stuff you use now? It's your thing. Do what you wanna do. I can't tell you who to sock it to. It's your thing. Yeah, do what you wanna do. Don't let me tell you who to sock it to. Let me hear you say it's my thing. I do what I wanna do.
Sugar, oh honey, honey, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Honey, oh sugar, sugar, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. I just can't believe the loveliness of loving you. I just can't believe it's true. I just can't believe the wonder of this feeling too. I just can't believe it's true. Ah, sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Oh, honey. Oh, sugar, sugar. You are my candy girl.
I mean, the amount of remodeling here is
Yeah.
So,
is flabbergasting.
yeah. So this is the square. So it was against this wall, or this was 13?
I would say 13 was to the right here,
Yeah.
and 12 was here. And between the two, there was a fortunately, I was right in the middle of my chief residency year in cardiovascular surgery when January 6th, 1968 occurred. Shumway, in my mind, is legitimately the spiritual leader of the transplantation program. So I operated in room 12 to harvest the heart from the very first donor. And Dr. Shumway was opening the recipient, preparing the recipient. So when I finished, I walked through that little connecting causeway into room 13, where I placed the heart on the back table, and then went and stood opposite Shumway, and we excised the heart of the recipient. I had my doubts at that point about the total legality of what we were doing. At least we had a replacement, the graft, on the back table, and sutured it in, resuscitated it, and it worked beautifully. We then closed the patient up and wheeled him out of room 13 down this hallway,
Yeah.
I believe this hallway, and then to the left to what was in the intensive care unit.
There's been some remodeling.
Right. The bed was situated in this orientation. Okay. I noted reporters trying to climb the wall of this particular area of the intensive care unit. I personally did not have to deal with that very much. Dr. Shumway appeared at all of the press conferences that were held after the operation. At the time, you know, he had to prepare the press for an outcome that would not be totally successful, and he did so by describing the patient's series of complications. And he did succumb 15 days after operation. But it was a milestone experience, and so I was in a perfect position to help Shumway in the culmination of all of those years of experimental work with the first clinical case. It was magical.
How long do you think Beatlemania will last?
As long as you all keep coming.
The Beatles are great, Harvey Handman says so. Hey, the Beatles are great. Hey, the Beatles are great. They're great.
I love them. I don't care what anybody thinks. I love the Beatles for them, and I'll always love them. Even when I'm 105 and an old grandmother, I'll love them. And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrienne from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart. I love you, Paul, and please come to the window so I can just see you. I saw you smoking before, and I kissed the limousine you looked out of. But I love you, and I want you, Paul. Please look at. And Ringo, you can look out too, because I like you.
There have been huge crowds of teenage girls outside complaining that they don't want to mob you, they just want to speak to you. What do you think about this? Do you want to talk to them?
Well, have you ever tried talking to about 200 people at once?
We'd love to, you know. We never... if we all wave and somebody always says, stop that waving, you're inciting them.
Go ahead, Ralph. Run right behind. Wait a minute.
Why do you like them so much?
I don't know, there's just something about them. I don't know, when they sing.
Aren't they as good as anybody else?
No, they're better.
Like the Beatles?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah. Good as Presley?
Yeah.
What's a woman's opinion of the Beatles? A young woman's opinion, that is.
I think they're sharp. Just gorgeous. He's gorgeous. He's got a beautiful nose.
He's got a beautiful nose.
Ringo has a sexy nose.
We were told as soon as we got here last night by the police, don't look out of the windows and don't wave. And if we do that, you know, then we get the police chief coming up and saying, well, we're finished, boys. And he goes away and he won't look after us, you know, so we can't do anything.
Have you tried to sneak into the hotel?
Yes, we were in the hotel.
How far in did you get?
12th floor.
Well, the Domenico was not like that. We came here at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 to see them, and all they do is push you farther and farther away, and then they don't even let you see them.
You've been here since 6?
Yes.
Have you ever been this crazy about any other entertainer?
No, and that's what's so amazing. We don't know why we're like this.
Come on, baby. Let's do the twist. Come on, baby. Let's do the twist. Take me by my little hand and go like this. Yeah, twist. Baby, twist. Ooh, yeah. Just like this. Come on, little miss, and do the twist. My daddy is sleeping, and mama ain't around. Yeah, daddy's just sleeping, and mama ain't around. We're gonna twist it, till we tear the house down. Come on and twist, yeah, baby, twist. Ooh, yeah, just like this. Come on, little miss, and do the twist. Yeah, you should see my little sis. You should see my little sis. She really knows how to rock. She knows how to twist. Come on,
it began. I can't begin to knowing, but then I know it's growing strong. Wasn't the spring, and spring became the summer. Who'd have believed you'd come along? Hand, touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you. Sweet Caroline, good times never seem so good. I've been inclined.
It seems ironic that while our finest young men are fighting halfway across the world, other young men and women, safe at home, openly advocate abandonment of Vietnam to communism. Perhaps they really don't know what this war is all about. In the words of a battle-weary young Marine, they would understand if they'd cross this 10,000 miles of ocean and live with us. A day in Vietnam. This day, this trip, is not to delineate the why of Vietnam. Rather, it is to see the what and the how of our military operations, to give you a deeper insight into this war and the way it is being fought. While the coordinated effort of all Americans in Vietnam is vital to success, it is the young men of our Navy Marine Corps team that we will see firsthand today, down there in Vietnam. We've landed on the big airfield at Da Nang and will travel directly to the headquarters of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force for a briefing by the operations officer.
Gentlemen, I will give you a brief rundown on our present status in Vietnam, together with a thumbnail sketch of the initial landings and subsequent buildup. As you can see on this map, the 17th parallel divides North Vietnam from South Vietnam. Militarily speaking, South Vietnam is divided into 4 areas. The 4th Corps area in the south, the 3rd Corps, the 2nd Corps, and in the north, the 1st Corps, or as we call it, the I Corps area. The area within this I Corps is approximately 10,000 square miles with a beach line or coastline of 167 miles. The 3rd Marine Amphibious Force is responsible for all United States military operations in the I Corps area. Located here, in about the center of the I Corps area, is our major operational base of Da Nang. You will recall that it was at Da Nang that the initial landings were made by the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade. This is now our largest operational base. At about here, approximately 50 miles to the south of Da Nang, is the operational base at Chu Lai. The Marines and the Seabees have built a small airfield for tactical support. Our 3rd operational base is approximately 45 miles to the north of Da Nang. It is the base at Hue Phu Bai. Now, although the bulk of our Marines are located in or around these 3 bases, I want to point out that the Marines of the 3rd Amphibious Force have been fighting from one end of the I Corps area to the very other tip. With so many new and different things for you to see, it is difficult to sort them out in any order. However, it's quite easy to choose what you should see first. Our Marines. They're the finest.
These Marines have just returned from a tough battle in the north. They are now in a defensive perimeter. Their weapons are cleaned and cared for before a thought can be given to personal comfort. A matter of importance in the life of a professional fighting man. This is neither a clean nor an easy life for our men, but they've learned to accept the physical hardships of battle as their fathers did before them. In their famous hymn, Marines recount battles fought in every clime and place. Here in Vietnam, except for snow, they prove it. From the soft ooze of the rice paddies, they move on through swift-running canals and streams. Then push forward into the jungles that fringe the mountains, where elephant grass tears at the skin while vines tangle the feet and giant trees cut off the sun. But it's not just a matter of long walks in the tropical heat. Each and every step must be a cautious one, for the Viet Cong have prepared the way with mines and booby traps. So watch your step. A false one and your ankle is pierced by the nails of a crudely cunning trap that only digs deeper as you fight to pull away. A hidden shell sits waiting for the unwary foot. And you'll never know which innocent-looking piece of grass or fern covers a pit of sharpened, poison-tipped bamboo spikes. Marine engineers must constantly sweep the roads and trails in search of killer mines. The troops must provide a screen of security behind which Americans can assist the Vietnamese in the revolutionary rebuilding of their nation. It is necessary to constantly patrol the outlying villages and countryside to deny re-entry to the Viet Cong. Marines initiate literally hundreds of small patrols and ambushes throughout the I Corps area each week. But one of the most difficult jobs in this war without a front is to distinguish friend from foe. Each person must be carefully searched and identified. Whether VC are turned up by such scrutiny or captured in combat, they are treated with scrupulous fairness under the international rules of the Geneva Convention. Marines have found that such treatment of an often cruel enemy frequently results in the proffering of information that reveals the whereabouts of an enemy force. In possession of such knowledge, Marines react quickly. Plans are rapidly formulated, and a striking force moves out swiftly. As they move in on the enemy position, they are met by intensive small arms fire. It results in some casualties, but the attack is carried to the enemy stronghold. The Viet Cong are well dug in. The command decision is to call for artillery fire support to dislodge them. The observer gives the exact location to ensure the safety of friendly elements close by. Troops can make the final assault and move in to destroy the enemy equipment and supplies. Many of the hamlets our troops approach are known to be friendly, but even they must be approached cautiously, for emotional reactions are primal when villagers are first confronted by men with weapons. A Vietnamese farmer's entire world is a thatched hut, a small rice paddy, his wife and children. For the past quarter of a century, his village has been a battleground, completely isolated by Viet Cong destroyed bridges and mined roads. The VC wanted food. They took his rice. They wanted soldiers. They shanghaied his sons. His village chief objected and was beheaded. His neighbors who protested were beaten. He can trust no one. The Viet Cong told him the Marines would come to seize homes, murder children, and enslave entire families. Anyone who helped Americans, the VC said, would be tortured and killed. So, quite naturally, trust and confidence grow slowly, nurtured by little acts of mercy, by promises fulfilled. Surely the stranger who binds one's wounds does not intend to murder, and always the Marine's first question is, what can we do to help you? When the Viet Cong have been driven out of the area, a combined action company is formed to provide security for the village. Marines and South Vietnamese popular forces, militiamen from the village, work and train together in this company. Their patrols and ambushes prevent Viet Cong reinfiltration. The villagers and their headman live unmolested. With this security, fear is replaced by hope and the desire to build for the future. Marines work side by side with the village people, constructing churches, hospitals, and schools. American generosity provides the building tools, even the very bricks and mortar. Through many civic action funds, and the Marine Corps Reserve Care Program is one of them, Americans are giving unstintingly to help in this rebuilding of a nation and its people. In classrooms such as this, children, and adults too, are learning for the first time of the vast potentials of our free and democratic system. It is on this other front in the battle to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people that will be determined the kind of world their children, and our children too, will come to inherit. The Navy corpsman with his bar of soap and his bag of medical gear already is well loved by the Vietnamese people, symbol of America's helping hand. But he is only one of 100,000 Navy men committed to the war in Vietnam. For many of the Blue Jackets, it's an unusual new kind of shallow water warfare, operating fast, small boats, ground effects machines, and shallow draft transports. They hunt down and destroy the waterborne Viet Cong and act as advisors to the Vietnamese Navy as they move their troops along the water high roads for an attack on a riverside VC encampment. Just off the coast, other men of the Navy and Coast Guard are on constant patrol to stop and search thousands of small ships and junks. Many are carrying supplies intended for the Viet Cong. This blockade is known as Operation Market Time. It involves the surveillance of 1,000 miles of coast from the 17th parallel to the Gulf of Siam. Tough duty, but it's drying up one arterial lifeline from North Vietnam. Well offshore, in the deep blue of the China Sea, is the backbone of our Navy surface forces, the aircraft carrier. It's a floating mobile air base complex. Over 4,000 men live and work on this seagoing city. To keep the ship in operation and its pilots in the air requires the effort of a community of freemen, engineers, clerks, doctors, mechanics, pipe fitters, radar men, cooks, and bakers. Their working day averages 12 hours. It can be 18 or even longer when air operations are underway and planes are being sent aloft at 30-second intervals. Combat sorties over North Vietnam have been flown by Navy and Marine pilots. It's a dangerous job, and sometimes not all the planes come safely back. A search and rescue helicopter hurries on its way when that radioed distress call, Mayday, signals a pilot in trouble. He could be down in the open sea or deep in the jungle. Their job is to find him and bring him back. On this mission, photographed by a Navy cameraman, the pilot was forced to eject beside a rocky cliff along the forbidding coastline a few miles south of Haiphong. The helicopter cannot get close enough for a direct lift, so a swimmer hits the water. Search and rescue is costly, difficult, and dangerous, but the value placed on a single life makes any effort worthwhile. Many other ships accompany the carrier. One such is the destroyer, the tin can, workhorse of the fleet. Indispensable to the Marines ashore and the Navy at sea. In Vietnam, the skillful placement of supporting fire, destroyers, has often been a vital factor in the success of Marine infantry operations ashore. Another fleet operation in the South China Sea is the Amphibious Task Force. It supports teams of Marines and their helicopters that collectively are known as the Special Landing Force. The SLF operates from a specially designed ship that is a combination troop ship and helicopter carrier called an LPH. With almost lightning speed, the Special Landing Force can strike from the sky by helicopter and across the beach by amphibian vehicles in a highly effective two-pronged assault. The SLF has been employed at many points along the coast of South Vietnam. These Marines are part of the Air Attack Group in the operation in which we're going to participate today. As they head toward land and a new battlefield, the minds of the fighting men are occupied with their own thoughts, their own prayers. Even for those who have taken part in many previous operations, the race toward a new unknown always carries with it that special feeling in the pit of the stomach. We fly above the beach assault force, for our helicopter landing zone is well inland, behind the enemy position. We expect to catch him by surprise. The helicopter force will block him from escaping toward the west, while the beach assault group offloads swiftly, then moves inland to play the hammer against the anvil. Marines push through the jungle, they must overcome natural obstacles as well as the enemy hiding someplace in the dense growth. A river to cross is a welcome coolness, but its waters support a myriad of leeches that slip inside clothing to fasten on the skin. The wounds they leave are easily infected in this tropical climate. In deep jungle ravines, the troopers slip down and climb back endlessly for every foot they advance. Now you are with them, and watch where you step and where you grab. A movement in the shadow beneath you could be a vicious giant rodent. A harmless-looking vine might be a poisonous snake. Even the trees in this rainforest are hostile. They grow so thick their triple canopies bring darkness at noon. Hang on to the man in front of you, or you're lost in this midnight gloom. Then, suddenly, out of the misty darkness, contact. The enemy has good position and appears to be superior in numbers, so the Marines call in their equalizers, their support from the sky. This is the moment for which these pilots have been prepared, for which they've been ready and waiting. Approaching the target area, contact is made with the forward air controller. This Marine is an aviator attached to a ground unit. He gives the pilots all the information they need to provide pinpoint close air support for the ground troops, a Marine Corps specialty. Needed to even up the odds, and the infantry action is positive and powerful in destroying the remaining enemy. We have our casualties, but our fatalities from combat-inflicted wounds have been cut to less than 2% because of the speed with which a wounded man can be moved from the battle zone to skilled surgical help. While the Navy corpsman gives emergency aid, a medevac team is being brought in by that mechanical angel of mercy called a helicopter. Usually less than 30 minutes after being hit, a seriously wounded man is in the operating room, either at a field hospital or aboard the USS Repose, a hospital ship that has been a welcome addition to our medical facilities in the combat zone. The gleaming white ship carries everything that would be found in the most modern hospital ashore. A full staff of doctors, nurses, and corpsmen functions with the same efficiency as the crew that moves the ship into the area where the action is. Though battle wounds are the cause of most of the serious casualties, there are many more that result from the environment. Heat prostration, immersion foot, malaria. These can be as devastating to our combat effectiveness as bullets or pungi pits. But the knowledge that quick and sure care is close at hand helps keep morale high in the rice paddies. But the Red Cross, which symbolizes our medical units, is not the only cross in Vietnam. Wherever the Marines and sailors go, the chaplain also goes. Whether it is for moral and spiritual counseling, a friendly word to a lonely man, or the softening of unpleasant news from home, the chaplain is on the scene. Be it a stretch of sand or a clearing in the jungle, it becomes a church as he sets up his altar. The men gather to worship in the same familiar routine of devotion as their families back home. As he holds service, the chaplain cannot dismiss the thought, will they all return? He knows full well they won't all come back alive. Prayers are said, a letter is written home to the family, yet so little can be done for this one who was given so much. There will be no more tales of his exciting adventure in a far-off land. No more plans for his education, his family, his home. He may have been a lad, not quite a man in years, but he gave us a man's greatest treasure, his life, and he gave it not unknowingly. These men prove every day they understand the why of Vietnam. Listen to a few letters written home by these young men, some of whom have since been killed.
Those boys who are burning their draft cards, marching in protest, getting married, and hiding behind an education just show me that they aren't mature enough to accept the responsibility of being an American, and therefore they don't deserve to be called Americans. Mom, I don't want to die over here, but if there's what it takes to make the world a better place for you and Dad and everyone to live, then giving my life won't be in vain.
I try to love my fellow man, no matter who or what he is. I find it hard to believe that American men and women really object to U.S. servicemen being here in Vietnam. If those people who parade, protest, and tell us we're fighting a useless war had to live without their freedom, they changed their point of view. Please don't think I'm trying to talk or act like a hero, because I'm far from it. I'm just trying to do my part in this war. But it's a war that I'd gladly give my life for if it'd help bring freedom to the people here and help it grow stronger in our own country. The day I left home to come over here, I kissed my kids goodbye and my wife had tears in her eyes. I'm just like thousands of other servicemen here in Vietnam who dream of seeing our families and loved ones again. I do not wish to die here, but I have no fear of death. I know my God is real, and my trust and faith is in Him. Keep praying for me, as I shall pray for you.
It's a lousy war, as is any war, but it's going to be fought sometime, someplace. I hate to see what it's doing to these poor people here in Vietnam, but I'd rather be here than in Minnesota. If and when my time to go comes, I will go. I'll go because I know the meaning of the word freedom. I'll go because I love my family, I love my country, and I love my God. Call it any name you will, from foolishness to sacrifice, but be sure to include love.
This is the end of our day in Vietnam. A glimpse of the war as it is being waged all day, every day, by these young men who are growing up in a hurry. 18, 19, 20 years old. They were boys when they got here. They've become men overnight. The suffering, hardships, and sorrow they bear, not only their own, but what they see in others around them, has helped to make them compassionate, tolerant, and mature. The young men who comprise the vast bulk of our Navy and our Marine Corps, who are seldom seen on television, who are rarely interviewed by the press, these men are, as they have always been, the truly strong men of our nation. Only a couple of years ago, these young men would have been embarrassed to tell what patriotism meant to them, how much they loved their homes, their God, their country. Now they daily risk their lives for their beliefs. This vast cross-section of America, it's young, tired, gallant fighting men. This is not only the face of America, this is the heart of America. They will return, most of them, but that valiant heart will keep beating only if it is nourished and sustained by the rest of America. And these, then, are the true heroes of the war, the young men of your Navy and your Marine Corps. Whatever they are, and ultimately, whatever our country is, we owe to them and their brothers in the other services, past, present, and future.
Has come, and the land is dark, and the moon is the only.
An international crowd of reporters and photographers from all major news outlets in Germany arrive at Ray Barracks, Friedberg, for a special press conference. The most famous enlisted man and usurer during the last year and a half is about to go back to his millions of fans. Because he has been almost completely away from singing and acting while in the Army, reporters have plenty of questions about the future to ask Sergeant Elvis Presley. Elvis says he plans to continue with his style of rock and roll singing, but without his famous sideburns. However, his greatest interest is now in serious dramatic acting. Also of great interest to reporters are his feelings about the Army. When asked by a Screen Digest interviewer if his military experience has been beneficial to him in any way, Elvis said,
"It's been a big help in both my career and on my personal life, because I've learned a lot. I made a lot of friends that I never would have made otherwise, and I've had a lot of good experiences and some bad ones, naturally. It's good to rough it, to put yourself to a test, to see if you can take it, and see if you can stand up under it."
Another thing we hear a lot about in the Army, especially here, is that we are not only soldiers, but goodwill ambassadors.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's definite. It stands to reason, because we are in a foreign country, and what we do here will reflect on America and our way of life.
As the press conference ends, photographers move in to get that one last picture. An attractive girl reporter gets a kiss, and then an encore as the flash bulbs pop. Elvis has only 1 day of processing before leaving USAREUR. He takes with him many good memories and pride in his military service.
At Fort Dix, New Jersey, Sergeant Elvis Presley is mustered out after 2 years of Army service. The rock and roll idol of millions is back on the scene. Among his greeters, Nancy Sinatra, daughter of another well-known vocalist. Elvis is glad as can be to be back and eager to start singing. He's also nearly interested in becoming a serious actor. The Army's loss may be the drama's gain. Who knows?
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. That completes the opening statements, and now the candidates will answer questions or comment upon one another's answers to questions put by correspondents of the networks. The correspondents.
I'm Sander Van Oker, NBC News.
I'm Charles Warren, Mutual News.
I'm Stuart Novins, CBS News.
Bob Fleming, ABC News. The first question to Senator Kennedy from Mr. Fleming.
Senator, the Vice President in his campaign has said that you are naive and at times immature. He has raised the question of leadership. On this issue, why do you think people should vote for you rather than the Vice President?
Well, the Vice President and I came to the Congress together. 1946, we both served in the Labor Committee. I've been there now for 14 years, the same period of time that he has. So that our experience in government is comparable. Secondly, I think the question is, what are the programs that we advocate? What is the party record that we lead? I come out of the Democratic Party, which in this century has produced Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and which supported and sustained these programs which I've discussed tonight. Mr. Nixon comes out of the Republican Party. He was nominated by it. And it is a fact that through most of these last 25 years, the Republican leadership has opposed federal aid for education, medical care for the aged, development of the Tennessee Valley, development of our natural resources. I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Mr. Nixon, would you like to comment on that statement?
I have no comment.
The next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Van Oker.
Mr. Vice President, since the question of executive leadership is a very important campaign issue, I'd like to follow Mr. Novin's question. Now, Republican campaign slogans, you'll see them on signs around the country, as we did last week, say, it's experience that counts. That's over a picture of yourself, sir. Implying that you've had more governmental, executive decision-making experience than your opponent. Now, in his news conference on August 24th, President Eisenhower was asked to give one example of a major idea of yours that he adopted. His reply was, and I'm quoting, "If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember." Now, that was a month ago, sir, and the President hasn't brought it up since. And I'm wondering, sir, if you can clarify which version is correct, the one put out by Republican campaign leaders or the one put out by President Eisenhower?
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that if you know the President, that was probably a facetious remark. I would also suggest that insofar as his statement is concerned, that I think it would be improper for the President of the United States to disclose the instances in which members of his official family had made recommendations, as I have made them through the years, to him which he has accepted or rejected. The President has always maintained, and very properly so, that he is entitled to get what advice he wants from his cabinet and from his other advisors without disclosing that to anybody, including, as a matter of fact, the Congress. Now, I can only say this. Through the years, I have sat in the National Security Council. I have been in the cabinet. I have met with the legislative leaders. I have met with the president when he made the great decisions with regard to Lebanon, Kimoy Matsu, other matters. The president has asked for my advice. I have given it. Sometimes my advice has been taken. Sometimes it is not. I do not say that I have made the decisions. And I would say that no president should ever allow anybody else to make the major decisions. The president only makes the decisions. All that his advisors do is to give counsel when he asks for it. As far as what experience counts and whether that is experience that counts, that isn't for me to say. I can only say that my experience is there for the people to consider. Senator Kennedy's is there for the people to consider. As he pointed out, we came to the Congress in the same year. His experience has been different from mine. Mine has been in the executive branch. His has been in the legislative branch. I would say that the people now have the opportunity to evaluate his as against mine, and I think both he and I are going to abide by whatever the people decide.
Senator Kennedy?
Well, I'll just say that the question is of experience, and the question also is what our judgment is of the future, and what our goals are for the United States, and what ability we have to implement those goals. Abraham Lincoln came to the presidency in 1860 after a rather little-known session in the House of Representatives, and after being defeated for the Senate in '58, and was a distinguished president. There is no certain road to the presidency. There are no guarantees that if you take one road or another that you will be a successful president. I have been in the Congress for 14 years. I have voted in the last 8 years, and the Vice President was presiding over the Senate and meeting his other responsibilities. I have met decisions over 800 times on matters which affect not only the domestic security of the United States, but as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The question really is, which candidate and which party can meet the problems that the United States is going to face in the 60s?
Mr. Vanocur's question for Vice President Nixon.
Mr. Vice President, in one of your earlier statements, you said, we've moved ahead, we've built more schools, we've built more hospitals. Now, sir, isn't it true that the building of more schools is a local matter for financing? Were you claiming that the Eisenhower administration was responsible for the building of these schools, or is it the local school districts that provide for them?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, your question brings out a point that I'm very glad to make. Too often, in appraising whether we are moving ahead or not, we think only of what the federal government is doing. Now, that isn't the test of whether America moves. The test of whether America moves is whether the federal government, plus the state government, plus the local government, plus the biggest segment of all, individual enterprise, moves. We have, for example, a gross national product of approximately $500 billion. Roughly $100 billion to $125 billion of that is the result of government activity. $400 billion, approximately, is a result of what individuals do. Now, the reason the Eisenhower administration has moved, the reason that we've had the funds, for example, locally, to build the schools and the hospitals and the highways, to make the progress that we have, is because this administration has encouraged individual enterprise. And it has resulted in the greatest expansion of the private sector of the economy that has ever been witnessed in an 8-year period. And that is growth. That is the growth that we are looking for. It is the growth that this administration has supported and that its policies have stimulated.
Senator Kennedy?
Well, I must say, I think the reason that the schools have been constructed is because the local school districts were willing to increase the property taxes to a tremendously high figure, and in my opinion, almost to the point of diminishing returns in order to sustain these schools. Secondly, I think we have a rich country, and I think we have a powerful country. I think what we have to do, however, is have the president and the leadership set before our country exactly what we must do in the next decade if we're going to maintain our security in education, in economic growth, in development of natural resources. The Soviet Union is making great gains. It isn't enough to compare what might have been done 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. I want to compare what we're doing with what our adversaries are doing, so that by the year 1970, the United States is ahead in education, in health, in building, in homes, in economic strength. I think that's the big assignment, the big task, the big function of the federal government.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God. Vice President Johnson, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, President Truman, Reverend clergy, fellow citizens. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control
shall not have passed away merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required, not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of our border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds, in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas. And let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house. To that World Assembly of Sovereign States, the United Nations, our last best hope, in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Finally, to those nations who would make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction, unleashed by science, engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction, we dare not tempt them with weakness, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course, both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed by the steady spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter that uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depth, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our course. Since this country was founded, each generation of Americans has been summoned to give testimony to its national loyalty. The graves of young Americans who answered the call to service surround the globe. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though in battle we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking His blessing and His help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Russ Hodge in Memphis, Tennessee, Dan Rather in New York, Bernard Kalb in Saigon, Marvin Kalb in Wellington, New Zealand, and Bert Quint in Khe Sanh, South Vietnam.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial situation, were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck. Police said they found a high-powered hunting rifle about a block from the hotel, but it was not immediately identified as the murder weapon. Mayor Henry Loeb has reinstated the dusk-to-dawn curfew he imposed on the city last week when a march led by Dr. King erupted in violence. Governor Buford Ellington has called out 4,000 National Guardsmen. And police report that the murder has touched off sporadic acts of violence in a Negro section of the city. In a nationwide television address, President Johnson expressed the nation's shock.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King. I ask every citizen to reject the blind violence that has struck Dr. King, who lived by nonviolence.
Dr. King had returned to Memphis only yesterday, determined to prove that he could lead a peaceful mass march in support of striking sanitation workers, most of whom are Negroes. Dr. King had this to say last night about the situation in Memphis.
Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
There was shock in Harlem tonight when word of Dr. King's murder reached the nation's largest Negro community. Men, women, and children poured into the streets. They appeared dazed. Many were crying. A young Negro said Dr. King didn't really have to go back to Memphis. Maybe he wanted to prove something.
You keep saying you got something for me, something you call love, but confess you've been a messin' where you should.
Okay, Houston, as I stand out here in the wonders of the unknown in Hadley, I realize there's a fundamental truth to our nature. Man must explore.
One of the things you got to stop and do, make sure, is to have fun too, because you're only probably going to come this way once.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. Now, May, when much to my surprise, a pair of bunny eyes. Do-do-do-do-do. Oh, is this a neat way to travel? Isn't it great? Dum-da-dum-dum-dum. 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 I like to skip along, but me, boy, skip. Or whatever you call it. I can't get my left leg in front of me. Dum-da-dum-dum-dum. Dum-da-dum-dum.
It was almost dangerous. You lose sight of the fact that it's a vacuum out there, and if you spring a leak next to it, you're going to be dead.
Uh-oh. Nice soft Navy landing. Yahoo! Oh. Ah. Boy, do I like to run up here. I feel like Bugs Bunny. That's neat. And here comes the Boxy twins. You're pretty agile there, Twinkle Toes. I'm going out for a ballet when I get back. You learn another line of work up here. And while you're bouncing around there, you might keep an eye out for a nearby crater. All right. I've been on my knees twice to get there. John? Yes, sir. You are black from the knees down. no way to avoid it. That's why I'm glad the pressure suit bends. John, you are filthy. I tell you, there's a pot called the Kill Blast. Hey, here's a rock I'll be glad to see in Houston. Man, Tony, you don't know how much fun this has been. We concur, John.
A bit of messing, and now someone else is getting all your best. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days these boots are gonna walk all over you. Yeah. You keep lying when you ought to be truthin', and you keep losing when you ought to not bet. You keep saying when you ought to be a-changin'. Now what's right is right, but you ain't been right yet. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Rehearsing and nursing a part. We know every part by heart. Overture, curtain lights. This is it. We'll hit the heights. And oh, what heights we'll hit. On with the show. This is it.
The Andy Griffith Show.
Hi, I'm Dick Clark, and it's time now for American Bandstand.
The Beverly Hillbillies. Bugs Bunny Show.
It's Burke's Law.
Car 54, where are you? Come along, everybody, to the new Casper cartoon show.
From the coonskin cap on the top of old Dan to the heel of his rawhide shoe.
Sullivan Show. The FBI.
The Fugitive, in color.
Green Acres is the place to be.
Gunsmoke, with Milburn Stone as Doc.
Hawaiian Eye.
Hawaiian Eye.
Tonight from Hollywood on Honolulu.
Insight.
The Invaders.
Jeopardy! And now here's the star of Jeopardy, Art Fleming. Good morning!
Meet George Jetson.
Leave it to Beaver.
We've got a gorilla for sale, a yellow gorilla for sale.
From New York City, it's time to play the Match Game.
Maverick.
A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course.
My Three Sons.
There is nothing wrong with your television set.
Want you to meet the family known as the Real McCoy.
Petticoat Junction.
Though the streams are swollen, keep them doggies rolling, right.
Johnny Yuma was a rebel. He roamed through the West. The Rifleman.
any size. Stingray, Stingray. Stingray.
Starring Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.
Top Cat, the most effectual Top Cat, who's intellectual.
Where no man has gone before.
That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Ultraman, here he comes from the sky.
The Untouchables. A Desilu production.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Starring Richard Basehart.
Yogi Bear.
This is a Bugs Bunny show.
Once upon a time you dressed so fine, threw the bumps of dime in your prime. Then you
free time, so I came over. I thought I might help with the packing. Oh, I love the look of packing crates. The sight of our household in preparation, movement, progress, that makes me think of Africa.
Africa?
Hey, well, what kind of mood is this? I thought I'd find you full of sunlight today. Oh, have I told you how deeply you move me? Is something wrong?
I was the guy who gave away the money.
Who gave away what money?
The insurance money. My brother, he just gave it away.
Gave it away?
He made an investment with a man even Travis wouldn't have trusted with his most worn-out marbles.
And it's gone.
It's gone.
I see. I'm very sorry.
But you know, my brother's not the one who's to blame. Oh, no. By his lights, he did what made sense to him. My mama's the crazy one. My mama's the one who just handed him the money. She just got up one fine day and just gave away my future.
Perhaps you don't see things as well as your mother does.
Oh, this is the end for me. You know, it takes money to go to school. Well, what difference does it make anyway? I mean, why would anybody want to be a doctor in this nutty world?
Oh, my. Aren't we full of despair? Look here, was it your money? I said, was it your money that was lost?
It belonged to all of us.
But can't this make you see that there is something wrong when all the dreams in this house, good or bad, had to depend on something that might never have happened if a man had not died? We used to say back home, accident was at the first and will be at the last, but a poor tree from which the fruits of life may bloom.
Asakar, what is the matter with you? Listen, my family has been wiped out. What's the matter? Don't they use money where you come from?
I see only that you, with all of your keen mind, cannot understand the greatness of the thing that your mother tried to do. You're not too young to understand. For all of her backwardness, she still acts. She still believes that she can change things. And to that extent, she is more of the future than you are at this moment.
Well, all I know is that when somebody can get up in the morning and without consulting you, just blithely hand away your future, then life is impossible, it's futile, it's despair.
Listen.
No. I'm tired of listening.
I said that you will listen. I have a bit of a suggestion.
What?
That when it's all over, you come home with me.
Oh, Asagai. At this moment, you decide to be romantic.
Dear young creature of the new world, I don't mean across the city, I mean across the ocean. Home, to Africa.
You mean to Nigeria?
Yes. 300 years later, the African prince rose up out of the sea and swept the maiden back across the Middle Passage, over which her ancestors had come.
Nigeria?
Nigeria, home. I'll show you our mountains and our stars, and serve you cool drinks from gourds, and teach you the old songs and the ways of our people. And in time, we'll pretend that you've only been away for a day.
Wait a minute now. No. You're just getting me all mixed up.
Why?
Because. Well, because too many things have happened. No, there's too many things that happen. You know, I don't know what I feel or I think about anything at this minute. I'm gonna sit down and think.
All right, then I'll leave you.
Oh, no,
No, don't get up. You just sit a while and think. Never be afraid to sit a while and think. How often I have looked at you and said to myself, ah, so this is what the new world hath finally wrought.
Who knows? Could be. Who knows? There's something due any day. I will know right away, soon as it shows. It make 'em cannonballing down through the sky, gleaming its eye bright as a rose. Who knows? It's only just out of reach, down the block on a beach, under a tree. I got a feeling there's a miracle due, gonna come true, coming to me. Could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something good. If I can wait, something's coming. I don't know what it is, but it is gonna be great. With a click, with a shock, phone'll jingle, door'll knock. Open the latch, something's coming, don't know when, but it soon. Catch the moon, one-handed catch. Around the corner, or whistling down the river. Come on, deliver to me. Will it be? Yes, it will. Maybe just by holding still, it'll be there. Come on, something, come on in. Don't be shy, meet a guy, pull up a chair. The air is humming, and something great is coming. Who knows? It's only just out of reach, down the block on a beach. Maybe tonight, maybe tonight, maybe tonight.
What can you do about weather like this? Nothing. What can you do about the sore throat pain it often brings? Plenty. Take Sucrets, as many doctors recommend, for fast, temporary relief. Sucrets antiseptic lozenges help relieve sore throat pain fast. Sucrets contain the unique pain reliever Hexyl Resorcinol. Unlike leading mouthwash and cough syrup products, Sucrets dissolve slowly, continuously releasing Hexyl Resorcinol to bathe inflamed throat tissue. Sucrets kill germs on contact to help prevent infection. And Sucrets relieves sore throat pain fast. You can eat, drink, even smoke in greater comfort. Sucrets help relieve minor sore throat pain fast. In box, roll, and cherry flavored for children.
In an age of miracle, after miracle, you wonder, what really can be miraculous when it comes to basics like food? Well, now from Carnation comes new Carnation Instant Breakfast. It turns a glass of milk into a balanced meal. Think of it. You get vitamin C, the orange juice vitamin, as much protein as 2 fresh eggs, as much mineral nourishment as 2 strips of crisp bacon, plus more energy than 2 slices of buttered toast in every delicious, satisfying glass. Try Carnation Instant Breakfast. You owe it to yourself and to your family. Here is a breakfast that's almost too good to be true, and yet it is. And that's a promise from Carnation. Here's a man who loves good coffee, and he's discovered a new coffee creamer that lets him enjoy his coffee even more. Coffee Mate, Carnation's non-dairy coffee creamer. Needs no refrigeration, only 11 calories per level teaspoon. Your coffee even more. Switch to Coffee Mate.
This is the girl. This is the dress. And this is the look, the fresh, lively look of CoverGirl Dorothea McGowan. What photographer wouldn't agree that this face, this fashion, this figure make the perfect cover for 17 magazine? Dorothea's complexion always looks so natural you can't believe it's makeup. She uses CoverGirl, fragrant liquid and powder with famous Noxzema medication to help improve your complexion. And brand new CoverGirl lipstick in stunning colors chosen by CoverGirls. Medicated to help keep lips soft, moist, luscious. So for that naturally glamorous CoverGirl look, get CoverGirl Cosmetics with famous Noxzema medication. Glamour that's good for your skin, good for your lips. Right, Dorothea?
I love everything about CoverGirl. So will you.
Hold it. Isn't that wild? I just took 4 flash pictures without changing bulbs with Sylvania's fantastic new invention, the Blue Dot Flash Cube. Just pop one on any new Flash Cube model camera and shoot. With the Sylvania Blue Dot Flash Cube, you're always ready for the great shots that used to get away. So I bought lots of them. Maybe I'll stuff Christmas stockings with them. Oops. What about regular flash cameras? Sylvania Blue Dot Flash bulbs. When the dot is blue, the bulb is good. Blue dots for sure shots. So for regular flash cameras, Blue Dot Flash bulbs. And for new Flash Cube model cameras, Blue Dot Flash Cubes. Sylvania Blue Dot Flash bulbs or Flash Cubes. Isn't that wild?
Rough war.
Have a cigarette.
No, thanks. I prefer Pall Mall. Haven't you Redcoats heard? Pall Mall smokers are particular about taste.
Hi! You're just in time for the parade. Great. How about a cigarette? And not one of those, thanks. I just naturally prefer Pall Mall because I'm particular about taste.
Like a cigarette before we march? Oh, no thanks. I prefer Pall Mall. Pall Mall smokers are particular about taste.
What's so particular about Pall Mall's taste?
It's natural mildness. And you know what that means. Smooth, pleasing flavor. Nothing more, nothing less. I know what I like, and I like Pall Mall. Here, see for yourself.
Be
Enjoy the long cigarette that's long on flavor. 5 Pell-Mell famous cigarettes. Outstanding. And they are mild.
What gives Tarrytown the taste worth fighting for? Worth fighting for. The bright, inviting taste worth fighting for. Worth fighting for. Tarrytown's got a charcoal tip and it's got a white one too. Together they improve that great tobacco taste for you. Get the cigarette with the taste worth fighting for. Join the unswitchable smoke Tarrytown.
Tarrytown with a taste worth fighting for.
Hurricane Hilda roars into Louisiana for a weekend of brutal sport with lives, property, and crops. Thoroughly forewarned, people in the path of the approaching monster take shelter, or in some cases desert hopelessly unprotected towns. Those riding out the storm try frantically to batten down movable objects before running to shelter. National Guardsmen throughout the stricken parishes, as here in Franklin, bring people to safety. In this case, the brick courthouse. First aid stations, even whole hospitals are set up. In her full force, Hilda brings winds of 120 miles per hour. She is preceded and accompanied by an entourage of smaller tornadoes that pile more chaos and destruction on the stricken area. Property damage will run into unestimated millions of dollars. The roof that blows off is from the building that the News of the Day cameraman was using to shelter him while getting these pictures. Dawn in Franklin after Hilda had swept on with diminishing force into Mississippi and Alabama. In her wake, she leaves at least 35 persons dead and hundreds injured. More casualties may be expected to be disclosed as people return to their homes and start regathering their families and friends. President Johnson declares the region a disaster area and makes immediately available $1 million for relief of the victims. The remains of a trailer park are in Morgan City, a center for offshore sulfur mining. Hilda is no respecter of church steeples or any other kind of tall structure either. A radio tower is snapped like a dry twig. Broken telephone poles disrupt communications when they're most needed. The worst dread in the low-lying bayou areas was from floods. In the aftermath, homes stand in a placid lake. The heaviest economic damage is to the sugar fields. Some estimates are that 90% of the $100 million crop is gone. The Armory at Lafayette is but one of the many public buildings that house the 150,000 refugees from Hilda. The little town of Erath was one of the most viciously hit targets of the hurricane. Civil defense workers were tireless, and 8 of them were killed when a water tank buckled in the wind and crashed onto the city hall, which had been civil defense headquarters. The building was demolished. The workers trapped for hours before their tragic fate was known. A hurricane is not a welcome visitor.
awesome sounds of destruction being caused by Beulah's full force in the pre-dawn darkness of Wednesday, September 20th. With the subsiding of winds and the final arrival of daylight, an appraisal revealed chaos and ruination on a vast scale. Outside the Weather Bureau, just one car escaped damages from heavy timbers and falling roofing. Across from the Bureau, a preview of litter and debris to be encountered in all directions. In some early accounts, it said South Padre Island and Port Isabel were 90% destroyed. A close look when the area could be reached revealed that very costly and extensive damage had occurred, but it was not totally destroyed. The Port Isabel High School gym was demolished, classrooms were smashed, furniture and fixtures ripped apart, with rubble filling the school with the scene of desolation. System-wide, the school district had 17 buildings damaged or destroyed, and in early November, the district okayed acceptance of over $250,000 in settlement of an insurance claim. Port Isabel, being right on the coast, had caught most of the hurricane's full force. 500 National Guardsmen were called up for emergency duty in the valley. 1,500 more were on standby if needed. The Guard and Disaster Services had units in Port Isabel by the time residents could return. All utilities were out in Port Isabel, no lights, phones, for a while water, and this film tour was made before any attempt had been made at restoration of facilities, for cleaning up the mess at hand came first. Homes and businesses in Port Isabel followed the same pattern of destruction which prevailed elsewhere. One structure would be in ruins, another one nearby perhaps had gotten by, with just serious damage. An effective roadblock at the toll bridge entrance, a big truck neatly overturned. And then over the long causeway linking Port Isabel with South Padre Island. The causeway took the hurricane's pounding with little apparent damage. But the Isla Blanca trailer park resembled a scene of wartime bombing destruction. Mobile homes were so shredded, the wreckage of one blended into that of another. One owner later said, "How can I clean up my debris? I don't even know which it is." 116 mobile homes had been in the park. The Cameron County engineer along to give an evaluation of structural damage. The first accurate account of South Padre losses came. Some buildings had repairable damages, others were total losses. Further travel up South Padre was ruled out by a 10-foot wide chasm, 8 feet deep, washed out of the pavement. Several other cuts occurred at other points on the road. For a better perspective, cameras went airborne for a bird's eye view of South Padre Island. Here you'll be able to judge for yourself the effects of Hurricane Beulah, which left only 5 out of 40 beachfront homes with relatively minor damage, according to the report made by the county engineer. Then an aerial survey of damages to Port Isabel. National Guardsmen brought emergency power plants, laid out their plans, and helped Port Isabel recuperate. A big plane at the ISIS plant had been torn loose from moorings, slicing through a building with its left wing before coming to a halt. Heavy trees were uprooted. Only frameworks of some buildings survived. High voltage lines arced potential danger. Power lines and poles lay in crazy patterns throughout Brownsville. Power would be off for several days, causing nighttime gloom over this normally well-lighted gateway city at Texas' southern tip. Substantial buildings had collapsed, this one crashing down on a row of new farm tractors. Tree damage spared no streets, and often the trees caused damage themselves. This palm swayed too far and snapped at mid-trunk. A corner of the Brownsville Civic Center's roof was peeled away as 2,000 refugees huddled inside. The inspection canopy at U.S. Customs took a beating. Parts still hung on, but posed no real danger because nobody was going anywhere to be checked on travel. Some tall palms around the Fort Brown Resaca pushed into a South Seas profile, while severe damage came to the Fort Brown Motel, filled to capacity with utility workers sent in advance from upstate Texas to restore phones and power hard hit when a hurricane strikes. Smashed cars ringed the motel, practically all with flat tires, punctured by wind-driven debris studded with nails. No use trying a service station for repairs. They'd closed long ago. More gale winds with sheets of rain plagued Brownsville throughout the day. Elizabeth, Brownsville's main street, looked like this. Police warned us to be on the lookout for flying debris, especially tin and sheet metal, which could cause serious injury. Casual sightseers were barred from the area. The precaution was well taken, as this falling metal shows. Brownsville was to later realize the extent of damages when the bill for removal of debris alone came to almost $1 million. A sampling of damage to downtown business firms revealed most with sign and window damage. The most serious and costly came from ripped-off roofs, allowing torrents of water to pour in on fixtures and merchandise. And shattered glass, crunched underfoot, much like the sound made by walking in gravel. Damage was severe, but miraculously no one was killed or seriously injured. The same held true in other parts of the valley where gale force winds continued sweeping in as Beulah was moving north just inside the coastline. Power lines in most of this area were either down or would be. By now, both valley television stations have been off the air for some time. Radio was providing around-the-clock information from local authorities to thousands of people anxious to hear authentic information rather than rumor. Getting out was entirely too risky for most folks. In fact, one of the major problems encountered once a storm's apparent danger is past is the still likely chance of danger from falling objects. Store owners checking on damages didn't have to bother with their doors or, did I bring the key? There were open display windows which did just as well. There's been no count of the number of trees damaged and destroyed by the hurricane. Several thousand would be a conservative estimate. Many had graced lawns for many years. The wind damage to citrus was severe, with much fruit blown from the trees by hurricane-force winds. A surprising amount survived this phase of Beulah. Mass aid poured into the area from throughout the country. Normal home life impossible, whole families lived in refugee centers for several days. Guardsmen were on duty in full force at Brownsville, largest city in the valley. Nightfall revealed a roadblock stopping all non-essential travel into Brownsville. Without power, the city was in almost total blackness, leaving valuable items exposed. Guardsmen sealed off the downtown business section to prevent looting. One man was shot to death on Washington Street. His body was taken to Mercy Hospital for an autopsy. A lid of secrecy shrouded the event thereafter. Whether shot by guardsmen or police has never been made a matter of public record.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the 1960s. Mr. Green, great. The decade made famous by the narcissists who lived through it. Hey, me from the past. Finally, you and I agree about something wholeheartedly. But while I don't wish to indulge the baby boomers' fantasies about their centrality to world history, the 60s were an important time. I mean, there was the Cold War, Vietnam, a rising tide of conservatism despite Woodstock, racism. There were the Kennedys in Camelot, John Paul, George, and to a lesser extent Ringo. And of course, there was also Martin Luther King Jr. So the 1960s saw people organizing and actively working for change both in the social order and in government. This included the student movement, the women's movement, movements for gay rights, and a push by the courts to expand rights in general. But by the end of the 1960s, the anti-war movement seemed to have overshadowed all the rest. So as you'll no doubt remember from last week, the civil rights movement began in the 1950s, if not before, but many of its key moments happened in the 60s. And this really began with sit-ins that took place in Greensboro, North Carolina. Black university students walked walked into Woolworths and waited at the lunch counters to be served, or more likely, arrested. After 5 months of that, those students eventually got Woolworths to serve black customers. Then in 1961, leaders from the Congress on Racial Equality launched freedom rides to integrate interstate buses. Volunteers rode the buses into the Deep South, where they faced violence, including beatings and a bombing in Anniston, Alabama. But despite that, those freedom rides also proved successful, and eventually the ICC desegregated interstate buses. In fact, by the end of the 60s, over 70,000 people had taken part in demonstrations, from sit-ins to teach-ins to marches. But they weren't all successful. Martin Luther King's year-long protests in Albany, Georgia didn't end discrimination in the city, and it took JFK ordering federal troops to escort James Meredith to class for him to attend the University of Mississippi. The University of Mississippi, America's fallback college. Sorry, I'm from Alabama. So the civil rights movement reached its greatest national prominence in 1963, when Martin Luther King came to my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, where there had been more than 50 racially motivated bombings since World War II. Television brought the reality of the Jim Crow South into people's homes as images of Bull Connor's police dogs and water cannons being turned on peaceful marchers, many of them children, horrified viewers, and eventually led Kennedy to endorse the movement's goals. Probably should mention that John F. Kennedy was president of the United States at the time, having been elected in 1960. He was assassinated in 1963, leading to Lyndon Johnson. All right, politics over. Anyway, in response to these peaceful protests, Birmingham jailed Martin Luther King, where he wrote one of the great letters in American history. Doesn't have a great name. Letter from Birmingham Jail. 1963 also saw the March on Washington, the largest public demonstration in American history up to that time, where King gave his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." King and the other organizers called for a civil rights bill and help for the poor, demanding public works, a higher minimum wage, and an end to discrimination in employment. Which eventually, in one of the great bright spots in American history, did sort of happen with the Civil Rights Act. So one reason American history teachers focus on the civil rights movement so much is that it successfully brought actual legislative change. After being elected president, John F. Kennedy was initially cool to civil rights, but to be fair, the Cold War occupied a lot of his time, what with the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs and whatnot. But the demonstrations of 1963 pushed John F. Kennedy to support civil rights more actively. According to our dear friend, the historian Eric Foner, Kennedy realized that the United States simply could not declare itself the champion of freedom throughout the world while maintaining a system of racial inequality at home. So that June, he appeared on TV and called on Congress to pass a law that would ban discrimination in all public accommodations. And then he was assassinated. Thanks, Lee Harvey Oswald. Or possibly someone else, but probably Lee Harvey Oswald. So then Lyndon Johnson became president, and he pushed Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law prohibited discrimination in employment, schools, hospitals, and privately owned public places like restaurants and hotels and theaters, and it also banned discrimination on the basis of sex. The Civil Rights Act was a major moment in American legislative history, but it hardly made the United States a haven of equality. So civil rights leaders continued to push for the enfranchisement of African Americans. After Freedom Summer Workers registered people in Mississippi to vote, King launched a March for Voting Rights in Selma, Alabama in January 1965. And again, television swayed public opinion in favor of the demonstrators. Thank you, TV, for your one and only gift to humanity. Just kidding, Battlestar Galactica. So in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which gave the federal government the power to oversee voting in places where discrimination was practiced. In 1965, Congress also passed the Hart-Celler Act, which got rid of national origin quotas and allowed Asian immigrants to immigrate to the United States. Unfortunately, the law also introduced quotas on immigrants from the Western Hemisphere. Lyndon Johnson's domestic initiatives from 1965 through 1967 are known as the Great Society, and it's possible that if he hadn't been responsible for America escalating the war in Vietnam, he might have been remembered, at least by liberals, as one of America's greatest presidents. Because the Great Society expanded a lot of the promises of the New Deal, especially in the creation of health insurance programs like Medicare for the elderly and Medicaid for the poor. He also went to war on poverty. Never go to war with a noun. You will always lose. Johnson treated poverty as a social problem rather than an economic one, so instead of focusing on jobs or guaranteed income, his initiatives stressed things like training. That, unfortunately, failed to take into account shifts in the economy away from high-wage union manufacturing jobs toward more lower-wage service jobs. Here's what Eric Foner had to say about Johnson's domestic accomplishments. By the 1990s, the historic gap between whites and blacks in education, income, and access to skilled employment narrowed narrowed considerably. But with deindustrialization and urban decay affecting numerous families and most suburbs still being off limits to non-white people, the median wealth of white households remained 10 times greater than that of African Americans, and nearly a quarter of all black children lived in poverty. While Congress was busy enacting Johnson's Great Society programs, the movement for African American freedom was changing. Let's go to the thought bubble. Persistent poverty and continued discrimination in the workplace, housing, education, and criminal justice system might explain the shift away from integration and toward Black Power, a celebration of African American culture and criticism of white suppression. 1964 saw the beginnings of riots in city ghettos, for instance, mostly in northern cities. The worst riots were in 1965 in Watts, in Southern California. These left 35 people dead, 900 injured, and $30 million in damage. Newark and Detroit also saw devastating riots in 1967. In 1968, the Kerner Report blamed the cause of the rioting on segregation, poverty, and white racism. Then there's Malcolm X, who many white people regarded as an advocate for violence, but who also called for self-reliance. It's tempting to see leadership shifting from King to X as the civil rights movement became more militant, but Malcolm X was active in the early 1960s, and he was killed in 1965, 3 years before Martin Luther King was assassinated and before all the major shifts in emphasis toward Black Power. Older civil rights groups like CORE abandoned integration as a goal after 1965 and started to call for Black Power. The rhetoric of Black Power could be strident, but its message of Black empowerment was deeply resonant for many. Oakland's Black Panther Party did carry guns in self-defense, but they also offered a lot of neighborhood services. But the Black Power movement turned many white people away from the struggle for African American freedom, and by the end of the 1960s, many Americans' attention had shifted to the anti-war movement. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So it was Vietnam that really galvanized students, even though many didn't have to go to Vietnam because they had student deferments. They just really, really didn't want their friends to go. The anti-war movement and the civil rights movement inspired other groups to seek an end to oppression, like Latinos organized to celebrate their heritage and end discrimination. Latino activism was like Black Power, but much more explicitly linked to labor justice, especially the strike efforts led by Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. The American Indian movement, founded in 1968, took over Alcatraz to symbolize the land that had been taken from Native Americans, and they won greater tribal control over education, economic development, and they also filed suits for restitution. And in June of 1969, after police raided a gay bar called the Stonewall Inn, members of the gay community began a series of demonstrations in New York City which touched off the modern gay liberation movement. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are pretty simple. I read the mystery document, guess the author, I'm either right or I get shocked. All right, what do we got here? If the Bill of Rights contains no guarantee that a citizen shall be secure against lethal poisons distributed either by private individuals or by public officials, I already know it. It is surely only because of our forefathers, despite their considerable wisdom and foresight, could conceive of no such problem. Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. Yes, I am on such a roll! Silent Spring was a massively important book because it was the first time that anyone really described all of the astonishingly poisonous things we were putting into the air and the ground and the water. Fortunately, that's all been straightened out now, and everything that we do and make as human beings is now sustainable. What's that? Oh God. The environmental movement gained huge bipartisan support, and it resulted in important legislation during the Nixon era, including the Clean Air and Water Acts and the Endangered Species Act. And yes, I said that environmental legislation was passed during the Nixon administration. But perhaps the most significant freedom movement in terms of number of people involved and long-lasting effects was the American feminist movement. This is usually said to have begun with the publication of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, which set out to describe, quote, the problem that has no name. Turns out the name is misogyny. Friedan described a constricting social and economic system that affected mostly middle-class women, but it resonated with the educated classes and led to the foundation of the National Organization of Women in 1966. Participation in student and civil rights movement led many women to identify themselves as members of a group that was systemically discriminated against. And by systemic, I mean that in 1963, 5.8% of doctors were women and 3.7% of lawyers were women, and fewer than 10% of doctoral degrees went to women. They are more than half of the population. While Congress responded with the Equal Pay Act in 1963, younger women sought greater power and autonomy in addition to legislation. Crucially, 60s-era feminists opened America to the idea that the personal is political, especially when it came to equal pay, childcare, and abortion. Weirdly, the branch of government that provided most support to the expansion of personal freedom in the 1960s was the most conservative one, the Supreme Court. The Warren Court handed down so many decisions expanding civil rights that the era has sometimes been called a rights revolution. The Warren Court expanded the protections of free speech and assembly under the First Amendment and freedom of the press in the New York Times versus Sullivan decision. It struck down a law banning interracial marriage in the most appropriately named case ever, Loving versus Virginia. And although this would become a lightning rod for many conservatives, Supreme Court decisions greatly expanded the protections of people accused of crimes. Gideon versus Wainwright secured the right to an attorney. Mapp versus Ohio established the exclusionary rule under the Fourth Amendment, and Miranda versus Arizona provided fodder for Channing Tatum in his great movie 21 Jump Street, ensuring that he would always have to say to every perp, "You have the right to remain silent. But you can't silence my heart, Channing Tatum. It beats only for thee." But the most innovative and controversial decisions actually established a new right where none had existed in the Constitution. Griswold versus Connecticut dealt with contraception, and Roe v. Wade guaranteed a woman's right to an abortion at least in the first trimester, and those two decisions formed the basis of a new right: the right to privacy. Protests, the counterculture, and the liberation movements continued well into the 1970s, losing steam with the end of the Vietnam War and America's economy plunging into the toilet. For many, though, the year 1968 sums up the decade. 1968 began with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, which stirred up the anti-war protests. Then, racial violence erupted after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968. Then, anti-war demonstrators, as well as some counterculture types, arrived in large numbers at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where they were set upon by police and beaten in what was later described as a police riot. 1968 also saw the Prague Spring Uprising in Czechoslovakia crushed by the Soviets, and student demonstrators were killed by the police in Mexico City, where the Olympics were held, and Parisian students took to the streets in widespread protests against, France. All this unrest scared a lot of people, who ended up voting for Richard Nixon and his promises to return to law and order. Ultimately, like any decade or arbitrary historical age, the 60s defies easy categorization. Yes, there were hippies and liberation movements, but there were also reactions to those movements. On this one, I'm just going to leave it up to Eric Foner to summarize the decade's legacy. The 1960s made possible the entrance of numerous members of racial minorities into the mainstream of American life, while leaving unsolved the problem of urban poverty. It set in motion a transformation of the status of women. It changed what Americans expected from their government, from clean air and water to medical coverage in old age, and at the same time it undermined confidence in national leaders. Relations between young and old, men and women, and white and non-white, along with every institution in society, changed as a result. But there's one last thing I want to emphasize. All of this wasn't really the result of like a radical revolution. It was the result of a process that had been going on for decades. I mean, arguably a process that had been going on for hundreds of years. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is made with the help of all of these nice people, and it's possible because of generous support from the Bluth Family Frozen Banana Stand. Just kidding, we don't have corporate sponsors, we have you. Subbable.com is a voluntary subscription platform, by the way, you can just click on my face, that allows people who care about stuff, like you hopefully care about Crash Course, to support it directly on a monthly basis. I'm over here now, but you should still click on my face. So Subbable has lots of great Crash Course perks. You can get signed posters and all kinds of things, and most importantly, you can help us keep this show free forever for everyone. Thank you again for watching, and as we say in my hometown, there's always money in the banana stand.
When it's cold outside,